Hi, everybody. This is Tom Murphy, Pensacola, Florida. And today we are having our, quote, Men Talk Shop and Life Admin session with some of our usual cast of characters. In the mental health world, they used to be called character disorders, but we won't go there on that particular point. And today we have a special guest, Mike Farrenkopf, who is in Colorado. And I'm going to go into just a little bit. We have my close friends, Jim Sparks. We have, there's Big Jim. We have Tom Panis, currently doing his session from Connecticut. And there is old-time friend, Leo Sandy from New Hampshire. So, Mike, I really appreciate you coming and jumping in today and working with us. And as you can see, some of our nuances to make this all happen. So really appreciate it. I know it's early and you got a lot of stuff going, but really appreciate it, Mike. And with that, folks, I want to just give a little bit of background information about Mike. Let me first say, before I preface his bio, that I became connected to Mike back in January 2019, Pensacola, Florida. As I was having a shoulder surgery, and Mike was my physical therapist here somebody's calling in, hey, how are you, folks? And Mike was my physical therapist at that particular point in time. And we made a connection, and here we are still today with that. And Mike grew up in Colorado, has two sisters. He played a lot of baseball and basketball growing up, and then decided that he'd do a bachelor's of science studying kinesiology, and played baseball through college and pitched all 4 years. As you may see on our session at some particular point, that we're going to include that YouTube video of Mike in his college pitching and how that was used and possibly for pro recruiting and some of that. And then at which point that led, and we're going to go into that led into Mike doing a doctorate in physical therapy degree. And then at which point I saw him after that. He and his wife, who was also in the field, ended up moving back to Colorado, at which point began a young family. And we've got some pictures of that, and has a son that was born in September 2019 named Leo. I call him Leo the Lion-Hearted, but and at which point Mike is doing a little different version of PT by way of home health physical therapy. So with that, folks, want to kind of jump in, and with Mike, again, thanks very much for jumping in here. I know it's kind of a big shift. If we have anybody showing up there, Leo the Lion-Hearted, or family members showing up through the background, we understand completely. We have that all the time. Actually, I wouldn't mind him coming in, demanding something from Dad, and at which point, see how you handle it. No. So with that, Mike, if we could kind of jump in a little bit. Again, we've got this piece about obviously had athletic skill, getting into pitching. How did that track? At which point it was clear that you had a mission and a path with baseball that was going to kind of potentially head you in a pretty high level. And then kind of where did that go? What happened? And how did that kind of set the stage for you going into the world of PT?
Sure. And, thanks again for having me here. So my story, of course, I played baseball through my childhood, but in 2004, I was introduced to a different type of pitching motion that essentially, if performed correctly, it can help prevent, common pitching injuries. And so at the time, I wasn't introduced to Dr. Mike Marshall yet physically. It was through another pitching coach in high school, but after high school in 2006, that's when I went down to Zephyr Hills, Florida, and actually trained at Dr. Mike Marshall's pitching facility. to perfect, or not perfect, however, try to get better at this
Mhm.
pitching motion with hopes of attending college and, of course, playing in college. So just a quick background on Dr. Mike Marshall. He he won a Cy Young Award with the Dodgers back in the 80s. He was an interesting character. In the off season, he basically went back to school, got his doctorate in kinesiology because he realized, through his professional pitching career, he was slowly, losing range of motion in his elbow. He was, essentially getting injured while doing something that he loved. So, long story short, he, retired from his baseball career and opened up that facility in Zephyr Hills, Florida. So that's in 2006. I went down there and spent 2 years down there learning the motion, and that opened the door for me to go to University of the Incarnate Word in San Antonio, Texas, where actually the pitching coach there was familiar, or used to coach with Dr. Marshall at some point in his coaching career. So it was kind of nice. I went to a university where my pitching coach knew the technique I was using and knew my background. So I pitched all 4 years. Did I have life-shattering, record-setting seasons? Not necessarily, but looking back at my career, I'm just so thankful I had that opportunity to pitch in college.
Could I ask, Mike, just at that point, Mike, at that point, it really sounds like in your head, as well as that level of specialized coaching, you were looking, and people, family, friends, whatever, saying, you should go pro. Was there any piece of that dream?
Oh, absolutely. Looking back at the way my path went and is still going, I never necessarily put all my eggs in one basket with that dream and that goal. And so I knew if I could just do one season at a time through college, I was truly blessed with, basically I graduated high school in 2006, and it was by the time I graduated college, from 2000 to 2008 to 2012, I was still playing baseball. So those 6 years I was very grateful for, and I was like, hey, if I could, actually start getting paid professionally to do this, that is my ultimate dream. However, by 2012, it was quite clear that, I could potentially, do the independent baseball route and try and maybe get paid, technically pennies to just play a sport and live with maybe a host family in a random, small town in North America here. But I decided, what? At that point, that's when getting into physical therapy school happened for me. So it was actually kind of an easy transition to be in that mindset, like, hey, I want to really, continue my baseball career, and then kind of realize, hey, I can still play baseball on the weekends with, old college buddies, and then pursue my doctorate in physical therapy.
Well, that's really, and I love that piece though too about, I love the way you were talking about not putting all your eggs in one basket, Mike. Quite honestly, my experience, that's pretty advanced for most young males, men, guys, whatever, to be thinking that early in life about not putting your eggs in one basket. So that hit me, and I want to kind of return to that. But I do want to make sure that it's okay, or that this won't induce any. What is your favorite professional team, Mike?
Colorado Rockies.
Okay, well, I just want to make sure that, and you might not be able to pick that up, I can turn that around here, that this won't induce any PTSD flashback, or you won't become angry, hostile, or resistant. Okay, I'm just checking. We like to. So with that, So, Mike, with that, after digging in long and intense educational background, PT, you come out into the world now as a physical therapist. You begin, and I kind of jumping to the Pensacola practice, doing that, working that route here, and then at which point saying, and at that point with your partner / wife going back to Colorado, beginning a family, doing this. How do you begin to look at some of these experiences, Mike, with you get a referral, a guy shows up, okay, in your office, you look at a sheet, okay, fine, boom, you start in. What goes as a quote healthcare provider? What goes through your mind of saying, here's what the issue is. What do I need to focus on with this quote patient? And then any beginning or leaning to get a sense of what you may or may not need to do, how the connection, any type of quote patient coaching piece, but who looks like to you as you go through it, who's going to have a greater sense of recovery / resiliency outcome. That must start to formulate inside right from the first moment. What's your process and what starts to hit you from that? Here's the intake to as you're going along and using all of your personal and professional background.
Sure. So right away, the medical diagnosis provided by the medical doctor is huge, but it can be very vague, right? So, with your permission, obviously, we did rehab. So obviously your diagnosis was a little obviously straightforward because we knew you had surgery and whatnot. But if somebody were to come to me with just right shoulder pain, of course, that is a helpful piece of information. And then from there, as the physical therapist, I have to figure out, well, do you have decreased range of motion? Do you have decreased strength, or where is your pain? Or and that is a key element. But a huge
what went through your mind, if I may? What started to go through your mind when I showed up in front of you?
Well, so how did you do it? And I guess in your case, it was more of a over time type, more multiple injuries. I can't remember in your case.
Yeah, it was multiple. Yep.
But that's a huge. Okay. And why I bring that up is because, if you were, somebody that just randomly fell and unfortunately, tore up your shoulder, that tells me one thing. But in your case, you are a active person. You want to get back to what you're doing. This is a huge thing for you. You're not used to just, sitting back and taking it easy and letting, things go. So to answer that question, yes, that's what went through my head.
So you thought I was going to be a pretty good patient?
Yeah. I mean, truly.
Be honest,
anything,
Mike. Be honest.
I tell you what, to jump ahead I remember the very last day we talked about you being in the made up Hall of Fame in the clinic, right? And that is a huge, and I kid you not, that is a huge compliment from when a PT can tell a patient that, because quite honestly, going back to, the first part of the question is sometimes we do encounter people that, unfortunately, I wouldn't say not trying, but the motivation isn't there. And so that can be difficult as the therapist. How do I motivate this individual? So quite honestly, Tom, I had no issues motivating you whatsoever.
I want to say that Mike has not been incentivized, or there has been no formalized retainer given to Mike. And I want to say that starting that college 701 fund for his son, and that I don't have. There's no connection to what Mike is saying now.
I don't believe it.
Okay, I just want to make we just need to be clear. No fake news. We're being transparent here. But yes, I did bring it up fairly early on that does Mike or that clinic give a PT patient Hall of Fame certificate? I was asking him fairly early on with that. So once we connected with that, great fine, and he pulled me through. So Mike, you're talking about getting a sense of people's, particularly men's motivation, where they stand, where they're at. I'd love to bring in Tom, Leo, and Jim at this point about some of these types of issues of when we have physical ills, challenges, how you've seen a lot of men handle that pretty differently. We're touching a little base with your history as a high-level athlete, becoming, developmentally into other stages of life, et cetera, along those lines. But I want to throw that up to Jim and Tom and Leo about some of our other experiences, particularly over life, where we've been either temporarily acute or chronic affected by medical challenges, and how we have dealt with it, and is there any other ways we may look at dealing with such challenges? Jim, Tom, or Leo, hop in.
Yeah, I had sciatica for 6 months, and it was very difficult to walk. I still forced myself to do Zumba classes, and that wasn't too bad. And I had physical therapy, which was very good. But I kept thinking that there's people worse off than I am, so I just have to suck it up. And 6 months after the end of 6 months, it went away.
Yeah.
So I just endured it. That's all.
So we're talking sucking it up, endurance, powering through it a bit.
Accepting it, yeah.
Yeah, and one recent one, Leo, if I may, of Leo has done a variety of things in terms of activities, from boating to motorcycle to horseback riding. And Leo has a horse named Jackson. And Leo, you relayed to us recently that you literally got thrown off the horse. And how did you find your way to get back up on the horse again?
Well, I just know that was one of the rules. You have to get back up.
Right.
If you're going to ride again, you have to get back on. So I ended up getting on another horse until Jackson healed, and riding that other horse, and I was fine with it.
Who got hurt worse, you or Jackson?
I don't know. Jackson was in pain. That's why he kicked me off.
Yeah. Okay. Tom, Jim, anything from that kind of standpoint of, and I'll call it physicality, but the stuff that anything from a physical, competitive male standpoint that presented a challenge, and what we did with it.
Well, I'm getting physical therapy now for some shoulder pain. And I'm not very motivated. The exercises I do during physical therapy, I get bored with them. And I wonder, Michael, how you mentioned motivating patients. They don't talk to me about motivation at all. And I wondered if you have any suggestions for self-motivation. And I mentioned this to Tom earlier, in general, apart from that, Mike, if any of your experiences in baseball in terms of the mental aspect of winning, the mental aspect of overcoming fear and so forth, if you got any principles from your baseball playing that apply to your life now.
Sure. Yeah, so the motivating, that one can be tricky, but typically what I tell people is, I'll be honest, half the time I don't even like to exercise, right? By all means.
Okay. Now we got it. Thank you. There we go. It's open honesty here, pal. Go right ahead.
But I tell them what I've learned, kind of through sports is, granted, training for sports was somewhat different. But what I took from that is you have to at least try and keep doing something a little bit at a time. So what I
And
always tell my patients is do not exercises. Don't pick and choose which ones might work for you. If that's truly one stretch in the morning and then you think of another one at night, think of your rehab as a marathon, not a sprint. um, that's one way that I try to sell the exercises. The other thing is, obviously, if it causes too much time out of your day, if it causes pain, well, of course, naturally, we're not going to want to do it. So that's where I try to motivate them, my patients, try to keep it simple, try to set yourself little goals. And truly, if a lot of times I tell my patients too, like, I'm not training you for the Olympics. So truly, if this means that, decreasing the pain in your shoulder and you can get a little bit more movement just to go work on your favorite sports car that you own, let that be your little motivation. So keeping it simple and setting short goals is what I try to do. And I'll be honest, I didn't really know how to preach that in the first year of my career. So I'm still learning different ways to motivate people.
now you did say that you were
Go ahead.
training me for the senior Olympics there, Mike. I want to see, make sure we know the bridge and
Racquetball, right? I said in racquetball, right?
racquetball. I was a racquetball player for years, just as a quick little aside. Racquetball, loved the sport for years and years, played it, did not play for 25 years. And at which point, now on my screen, he's over here, but there he is, Jim Sparks, was a racquetball player, pretty good, was known around campus to be pretty good, was involved in team competitive level, said, would you like to try? I jumped in last year for the first time and started playing with Jim. How did I do with that, Jim? Be careful now.
I do have a video which could be cut in here. So no, actually, Tom came out roaring after 25 years, and has real talent and obviously loves the game. So it was fun to play with them and look forward to getting back on the court with them. And I was going to mention that I was really interested in how you were saying you had learned a new technique for pitching, because as I somehow keep getting older, I'm not sure how that happens. I'm finding that I constantly have to relearn how to do things and improve my technique in order to keep, the shoulder pain down. And now that I'm mountain biking pretty seriously, like keeping the knees in the perfect spot, just this constant reinvention. So I hate exercise as a gym activity, love exercise as a sport, but
Right.
definitely interested in how to avoid the weight room for as long as possible while maintaining competitive level.
Right.
Thank you for that, Jim, about the review of my performance. And yes, I admit I started doing online work with Mike right after I played that day. Okay. And yes, there was a retainer copay across state lines that was part of that. Mike, we're talking a little bit about physical and motivation. And for most men at some point in life, it's a big deal. If I may shift a bit to where the head and the gut start to connect around this issue, where you had relayed to me recently about the loss of a mentor, and that sharing with me, and I appreciate that, was a big deal. And I'm wondering if you might be able to just share a little bit of, to whatever level, how that kind of hit you, and then at which point, how have you been doing, or how did you, quote, process and starting to work through that, quote, loss?
Definitely. Yeah. So you know, with his passing, you know, you're always in the mindset, I guess, that you're not going to have, you know, your loved ones or your friends around you your whole life. And so I quickly had to tell myself that, you know, the day of that I got the news, and basically just, you know, obviously remember what impact he had on my life, and where you know, where I am today. You know, a lot of, you know, me, I guess, meeting him, uh, you know, got me, I think, to be a physical therapist. So, you know, so I guess, of course, there is, of course, a lot of sadness that goes along with it. But like I said, remembering,
Mhm.
you know, how he impacted my life, you know, really helped me get through.
Gotcha. And
Um,
I understand, and I want to thank you, Mike, for being able to kind of touch upon that, because I know it's fairly recently with that. What do you, or what have you been looking towards, or how might we kind of touch that issue about when those types of things occur for us? What are some of the ways that you end up processing, dealing with, and how that changes, even though I know it's fairly recent?
yeah, um, you know, I guess a good thing to always be in the mindset of is, you know, not only maybe you did lose a loved one or a friend, but then remembering, you know, how many other people surround you and impact your life as well.
Right, right.
So that's a big motivating thing for me is, you know,
Mhm.
you have to keep moving forward. I have a son now. I've, you know, my wife, we've been married for since 2016. So just, I think just making sure that you constantly are,
Sharing, yeah.
you know, talking things out with, you know, your significant other, or even just making sure that you keep your mind busy with the people that are currently surrounding you.
You know that you're hitting on so many of the points, Mike, that we often talk about here. Sometimes that used to make reference to it as the three F's: family, faith, and friends. But there may be where people are not able to use all three, maybe just one, maybe two out of three. Two out of three, but even one's a pretty good batting average, Mike, right? 333. I'll take that. Right now, that's almost MVP level, as you know, in the league. But anyways, guys, with Jim and Tom and Leo, how can we kind of jump in with that piece again with that quote? Mike's talking about significant others, support, communication, family, faith, the friends. What have we done or seen where, you know, that has kind of helped us get through stuff? And I'll throw that out as a general for anybody.
Well, I like what you said, Mike, about we have to keep moving forward. I think that's important. I find that as I get older, more and more, I'm looking backwards, you know, remembering this, remembering that, and so forth. Okay.
No, Tom,
Yeah.
that's super. That you just hit me with, and again, because of whatever stage of life you may be at, but you just hit me with that piece that, you know, we might have a tendency to just be always looking back as opposed to what's forward, what's out there from here. And that just kind of hit me as a piece. Leo, thoughts, ideas, suggestions? Great, I understand. Thank you, Jim, for jumping in with us on that. Leo, what do you think about some of that piece of how people may be able to use others in a way to kind of help the bridge during those times of pretty big challenges?
Well, I think that's pretty much what happens. I mean,
Right.
the people who get through this, through grief, do have those supports, and I
Right.
think the ones who don't have those supports, they're alone. And we're social animals. We're not meant to be alone.
Right.
You know, and if people, you know, don't have that support, they can't grieve properly.
Mhm.
And I think that I know I used to, before my grandmother died, I had a lot of anticipatory grief. You know, I was grieving before she died because I knew she was going to die. And when she died, it seemed like the grieving period was much shorter.
And she was very significant, Leo Duke, in your life, right?
Oh yeah, yeah,
She
absolutely,
was big time.
absolutely. So that was that anticipatory grief was very interesting for me. To you know to think it, process it before it happened, and once it happened, it was a little bit easier to deal with because I had already grieved.
You hit her, right?
Right. And I think that, and of course, supports were always there and helped me get through it. So I just find that very interesting. I think I'm at the permanent, Kubler-Ross's permanent resignation stage.
Right.
Because I can anticipate grief because the people around me are getting older. And I know that I'm going to lose them. So I'm thinking about that, but I'm also resigned to it. And so I think that resignation level is helpful.
So doing that particular, and Mike, I'm going to jump to you on that piece of, here you are at, if I may, still early on in your career and developing all of those pieces, both to home and work, but you're doing, quote, home healthcare, which is a very special, very unique provider world. And seeing it people at a variety of acute and chronic stages. Bouncing into that world, Mike, of, again, how do you see with clients, patients in that world, how do they best recover as best as possible during some of those different types of more chronic or acute stages in life?
Yeah. So what I've, with home health, the patient has to be homebound, and 95% of the time, those people are not used to being homebound. So they either went through a traumatic injury, a planned surgery, or they are going through, something that is, trying to wipe them out. So, so the biggest thing that I've seen in home health is, there's sometimes it's a simple motivating factor of, hey, I want to just get to the grocery store again.
Simple. Yep.
I want to depend less on my family member just to exit the stairs, 3 stairs out of my front door. So I have seen, it's been I didn't realize that switching from like the outpatient setting to home health would show me such a different, I see physical therapy in such a different view and light now. And so in turn, that has actually helped my career. I'm finding ways to improve my communication, improve, like we touched on, my motivating skills, and of course, improve the physical therapy component. How do I truly get this person, out of their house safely? So, did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, Mike. And you're, in some ways, you're kind of going full circle with the life cycle in a fairly short period of time in your career, and that's pretty powerful. And I think, as I've relayed on many of occasions, some of these types of issues are daily, hourly types of things that I existentially, if I may say that, deal with as my friends, and we've mentioned before, having a number of physical challenges, but particularly over the last couple of years, having 2 incidences. The first one of aggressive and advanced prostate cancer, 2016, and then a reoccurrence of that aggressive form of prostate cancer 2 years later. And so there is always this almost daily mantra of, okay, what am I confronted with now? How do I deal with it? Leo mentioned the term anticipatory. So I've made a commitment that nothing is going to happen to me while I'm online with Leo at the bottom. So it's just one of those little things And look, there he is. I got a smile out of him. That's a big deal. So get this early in the morning without Jackson, his horse close by. But those types of issues that you're talking about is like literally depending upon lifestyle circumstances, and then how does one begin to, or ongoing, kind of deal with that when the definitions of recovery are very different. To go from I just need to fix a shoulder so I can do a little bit more of my landscaping to what happens if I test positive again tomorrow for cancer. And what does that mean about life, liberty, the pursuit of whatever relationships with those significant others? So just a small point on that. Folks, I want to begin to wrap it up. I know Mike has to head off and cure the family, cure the world with that, but because there's a couple of things I want to leave open that has been brought up by Tom that will not be part of our session. So Mike, I'm winding down with this, but Tom, Jim, Leo, anything that because of this carpe diem, appreciate the moment, anything else that we want to try to pull Mike into before we wrap up for today?
I was going to say, Tom had mentioned something that I didn't quite expand upon, is just my experience with baseball. What did it kind of teach me? What's a good life lesson that, in my daily life? And as a pitcher, I failed a lot. And so is that acceptable in my daily life? Probably not. You don't want to fail as much as I probably did as a baseball pitcher. But definitely baseball taught me, that I can definitely have bad moments and I can rebound from them. And what's funny, bringing up the Colorado Rockies is like, I will watch a couple of their games, and I know they're not the greatest. And maybe if I were to watch a Red Sox game, my opinion would be different. But major league pitchers fail a lot too, and that always makes me feel so much better about what I did in college. And anyway, it's just, I don't know. I think sports can be a good life lesson. But I'm sure the Red Sox, those pitchers never fail, right? But
no, they never do. No, and I'm thinking we could start a GoFundMe page, Mike, and pull in millions of dollars to let you fail every day and still make $3 to $5 million. Okay. So, we can work this out. We've got some influence with the people online here to do this. Folks, any last thoughts, questions, comments with Mike, or that has kind of got us thinking about life, liberty, and the pursuit of resiliency?
I do.
Mike, I wonder how many failures that Jonas Salk had before he discovered the polio vaccine.
Mm-hmm. And look at you. That made you be able to do Zoom class in later life, Leo, because of what Jonas did that. Thomas?
Yes, Mike, I was just going to say, you said you have a lot of failures, but a pitcher, you think of the number of pitches you throw, the number of games you play. I mean, my God, you can't every pitch can't make the strike zone or where you're targeting for. Also, I wanted to ask you, Mike, because I think of the pitcher as the most competitive position in baseball. Does that competitive spirit spill into your life at all?
It does. And there are times where my wife is competitive too. She played college soccer. So sometimes we have to remind ourselves hey, tone it down a little bit.
Let me just, now, I use the term PC, not for political correctness, but peaceful coexistence. Mike, how do you use that quote, tone it down in the household? No, I'm only kidding. That's going to be a whole other session on parenthood, young and old parenthood. But it sounds like you're ready to deal with the next patient, the next challenge, next family, Peter, your wife, and all of that. So with that, I just want to, Mike, thank you so much for kind of jumping in, holiday weekend for everybody to do this. time zone issues, which none of us have issues with time zones.
None of us.
Thank you very much, Mike. And you and I, of course, will be in touch. And at which point I'm just going to then close it up. So if you want to drop off, and I'm just going to close it up with the guys. But Mike, thanks a lot, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks.
Very
Yeah,
good
nice
night.
meeting everybody. Thanks for having me. All right.
Okay,
Take care. We'll
thanks,
talk-
Mike. Take care.
So anyways, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. I did just, it's almost a full hour or so, but I did just want to, that we can do in other sessions also. But Tom had brought up, and I don't know if we want to